After 16 years and $33.5 billion in investor capital, Uber just posted its first real profit. But to get here, it slashed driver pay, hiked restaurant fees, and steamrolled laws in nearly every country it entered. Because Uber's model is simple. They win and everyone else loses. But even now, just as they're finally winning, one rival is quietly claiming their market share. So how did Uber survive 10 years of losses? And is this profit already under threat? Even before Uber got off the ground, they were in trouble. In July 2010, it received its very first ride request and was quickly told by the city's transit authority to shut everything down. They accused them of being a cab company without a taxi license. There were threats of fines and even prison time. But Uber persisted and essentially ignored the threats with a "we'll deal with it later" attitude. CEO and founder Travis Kalanick simply told staff, "We ignore it." From their perspective, their business didn't fit into existing legislation and was an innovator with a service too novel to play by the antiquated rules the entrenched taxi industry abided by. Taxi companies were archaic enemies of innovation and expensive, according to Kalanick. As we'll soon explore, growth was everything to Travis. Investor money began to pour in, including some heavy hitters like BlackRock, Goldman Sachs, Google, even Jeff Bezos, who invested $37 million as early as 2011. By 2013, Uber was in 74 cities and was now worth $3.5 billion. But this was just the beginning. Uber soon entered what I'd call their hypergrowth era. They were launching in a new city every single day, and soon they expanded their services with Uber Fresh, which soon became Uber Eats in 2015. It was the perfect expansion. Uber already had a platform for tracking drivers and processing payments, so why not offer food delivery too? More services for customers and more job options for drivers. It was perfect, and quickly appeared in Los Angeles, Houston, Chicago, and many more cities. By 2016, Uber had received over $7 billion in funding, and its valuation was $51 billion. Uber was riding high, literally. Two massive new businesses growing unbelievably fast. But it was what came next that had everyone watching. In 2019, Uber went public with a valuation of $82 billion. $82 billion meant Uber's value had grown 23 times larger in just 6 years. With the IPO, the company managed to raise $8.6 billion. Yet, there was a huge problem. During this absurd rise where they managed to change consumer behavior and even force governments to change legislation, Uber never made any profit. That's right, this whole time Uber was losing billions. In the 3 years prior to the IPO, Uber had lost $10 billion from $79.4 billion in rides paid. This is the classic Silicon Valley model: growth at all costs. Focus on growth, dominate the market, then figure out monetization later. It's the same roadmap as Spotify, Airbnb, or Snapchat. Uber was essentially the poster child for the Silicon Valley model, which was why the IPO was so important. It was a proof of concept. Nearly a decade of no profits and a huge IPO and valuation. People wanted to see if this would pay off, and it seemed like it did. Many believe Uber was very overvalued. $83 billion, yet tens of billions of losses. When would this huge gamble be worth it? They had achieved their goal of mass adoption. Now they had to change their focus, from growth at all costs to profit at all costs. But it wouldn't be easy. Uber's playbook was to win at all costs, and those hidden fees on your ride feel a lot like those forgotten subscription charges on your card. With a lot of these subscriptions though, you have to spend an hour with the support rep and all of the retention staff just to cancel, and that's why I'm excited to talk about today's sponsor, Rocket Money. Rocket Money is a personal financial app that lets you manage subscriptions, lower bills, create a custom budget, and hit all of your financial goals all from one place. Rocket Money puts those forgotten subscription fees front and center, and with just a few clicks and taps, I can cancel anything I don't need. Rocket Money may even be able to try to get you a refund for some of the lost money. My favorite feature though is lowering existing bills. For example, you're locked into $80 a month for 1 gigabit internet, only to find out your provider has rolled out 3 gigabit internet for the same price and has discounted the 1 gigabit plan. Yet, for some reason, they don't just automatically lower your price. Instead, you have to call them. I love how effortlessly Rocket Money fixes exactly this. You tap lower bills, submit your request in a couple of taps, and Rocket Money's negotiators handle the entire back and forth for you. A few weeks later, you wake up to a lower bill or faster speeds, or both, all without lifting a finger. To save more and spend less, join the over 5 million members using Rocket Money today. Scan the QR code or click the link in the description to get started for free. Thank you to Rocket Money for supporting our videos. After Uber's IPO, things didn't go quite as expected. Straight after the public offering, shares fell by 18%. And in 2019, Uber lost another $8.4 billion. Yet, even more baffling was 2020. With the world locked down, e-commerce sales spiked by 43%, an increase of almost $250 billion. The only way for businesses to even operate was contactless shopping, which meant businesses like Uber Eats became vital. In fact, many restaurants could only survive if they used delivery apps, and Uber wasn't going to waste this opportunity. Uber and its competitors spiked commission fees as high as 30 to 40%, not to mention all the other fees stacked on top of that. One Chicago pizza restaurant had about $1,000 in orders, but Grubhub had taken $666 in commissions and fees, and Uber was doing about the same. For context, most restaurants have profit margins of around 3 to 5%. It was so egregious that multiple governments had to step in with emergency laws capping the fees to 5 to 15%. But the strangest part of all of this is that Uber somehow made even less money than 2019. Why? Well, while food delivery spiked, Uber's main service had collapsed with no one leaving their homes, so it didn't matter. But even with all these fees, the app couldn't make profit. Yet, they had another problem. Despite growing so fast, they were infuriating just about everyone, and it wasn't only the enormous commission spike. Every city or country had to figure out if Uber should be allowed to operate, while they expanded into every corner of the world. And I think now is a good time to talk about how Uber pays its drivers, because it shows us what's really going on. Despite the $10 billion in losses leading up to the IPO on $79.4 billion from rides, drivers are still barely scraping by. In 2018, the median profit for Uber drivers was $8.55 per hour before taxes. And a study by MIT found that 54% of rideshare workers made below minimum wage, with some even losing money. This did increase in the next few years above $13 by 2022, though much of this came from government pressure with minimum pay per hour. Travis said the company was too innovative for legislation, but this was the real reason lawmakers were so annoyed by Uber. It seemed like everyone was worse off. Restaurants made less money, drivers worked longer for less money, and somehow Uber is also still losing billions. Uber was going to change that, and unfortunately, for them to win, everyone else had to lose even more. In 2023, Uber reported its first real profits, $2.3 billion, then 4.1 in 2024 and up to 6.1 billion in 2025. But these profits had to come from somewhere. In 2024, Uber ride-hailing drivers saw their earnings fall 3.4% on average to $513 a week, despite working longer hours on average. And in 2025, it cut pay in Nashville by 20%. Drivers were seeing these pay cuts everywhere. If that wasn't bad enough, Uber also asked New York if they could cut drivers' minimum pay because of the recent drops in price of used cars and gasoline. Ironically, the cut request was denied and the city responded by actually raising the rates. Why was Uber cutting pay aside from making more money, of course? Well, it's pretty simple actually. Lower fare prices to increase demand. In an email sent to all drivers, Uber announced that we anticipate that these changes will lead to an increase in rider demand and result in more trips for driver partners. In most cases, the rates will be lower than those currently used. A 2023 survey by the Transport Workers Union found that 57% of food delivery workers earn less than minimum wage, as do 44% of rideshare workers. In order to make more than minimum wage, 74% of workers also reported having to work very long hours to get by, not to mention all the other issues like driver safety. Uber was now going backwards, and the amount of driver strikes across the world jumped dramatically. But it's hard to say that any of this made any change. In 2025, pay is the same as 2020, if not before that. It's hard to survive unless you're living in your car. Also, even though Uber has finally achieved profits, it might not be enough. Even with the $6.1 billion in 2025, investors aren't confident. Profits are still a far cry from the profitability investors had hoped for when the company went public. Additionally, Uber's reliance on external funding and mounting debt around $9.3 billion in long-term liabilities has created further concerns about its financial sustainability. In other words, a couple of years of modest profits isn't enough. It needs to make big money. Keep in mind, even though they're worth $175 billion today, they raised a total of $33.5 billion from investors, meaning that they only about 5x'd investor capital, which is quite bad for a startup that quite literally created a whole new industry. Over the years, we've racked up 160 million views, yet somehow we still haven't reached 1 million subscribers. That conversion rate is even worse than Uber's return on investor capital. If you've been watching without subscribing, please hit that subscribe button so that we can finally make 1 million a reality. Surprise, surprise, people aren't too happy with Uber constantly cutting wages. It's pretty much every state and country. Uber is still fighting against governments and the battles are only getting bigger. Senate Bill 1166, an Oregon state-level law, would create a minimum rate of 68 cents per minute of passenger time and $1.59 per passenger mile, and a minimum pay of $6 per dispatch trip, counting tips towards the minimum pay and requiring companies to provide paid sick time. That's right. Sometimes, where it hasn't been outlawed yet, Uber will take any tips and simply count it towards the minimum pay of drivers. So, tip or not, the driver makes the same amount. But Senate Bill 1166 is just the tip of the iceberg. The Colorado Safety Bill requires biannual background checks and other strict safety measures, which has Uber threatening to leave the state. Then there's the Washington State Surge Cap Bill, along with many more which are passing through the various stages of government. Despite being over a decade old, ride-sharing is still growing up. Governments and lawmakers are still trying to decide what to do with Uber while it takes advantage of everyone and finally makes a profit. Unfortunately, governments and laws often move very slow, but Uber's competition isn't so slow. Most competitors control a tiny market share. Jet, Instacart, and Grubhub all have between 1 to 6% market share, except for DoorDash. Uber might have 76% of the rideshare market, but the food delivery market is slipping away. Uber Eats only holds 26% of this market, while DoorDash, a much younger competitor, holds over 60%. In 2024, Dash fulfilled 2.5 billion orders. Its order volume increased by 26% yearly, while Jet's was 1% and Instacart's was 3%, with a gross order value of $80 billion, compared to $75 billion for Uber Eats. How did DoorDash appear out of nowhere and claim a huge part of Uber's business? Well, urban areas were crowded with delivery apps. Lots of people close together, short delivery distances. It was the perfect market. But when DoorDash launched, it saw a massive gap in the market. Suburbs. The market was underserved, yet had untapped potential. DoorDash built tracking technology for longer trips and partnered with smaller suburban restaurants that others ignored. All of this meant they suddenly got a lot of new, underserved clients who quickly saw DoorDash as the default. But possibly more important was their pricing. While Uber lost tens of billions just focusing on growth, DoorDash tried to become profitable on each delivery. They used a lot of dynamic pricing where delivery pricing would automatically change according to demand, area, or time of day. It sounds standard today, but DoorDash pioneered a lot of the common standards in food delivery. DoorDash didn't start off profitable either, of course, but their losses were much smaller, and soon DoorDash was earning money. To be clear, DoorDash is still much smaller than Uber in revenue and market cap, and this isn't an ad for DoorDash as they're potentially just as bad. But you can see how they stole the food delivery market from Uber, going narrow and deep, and the suburban market in particular, and trying to make money, not just growing. Despite all that, Uber has finally done it. After burning through tens of billions, they posted a real profit. But to get here, everyone else had to lose. It cut driver pay, hiked restaurant fees, ignored governments, and fought tooth and nail against any attempt at regulation. But was it all worth it? Well, even with $6.1 billion in profit and near total dominance of rideshare, investors aren't too impressed. They still have a long way to go to bring a return on their total losses, and even then, they might not have enough time to do so. Uber's still under fire, buried in lawsuits, fighting new bills, and now they're losing ground in food delivery. DoorDash isn't just catching up, it's already ahead. Uber might have won the battle for growth, but they've built a business model where the only way to win is for everyone else to lose. And that generally doesn't last very long in the grand scheme of things. But until then, I'm Hari, and I'll see you guys on the next one.